Britain has over 11,000 miles of coastline, and it's littered with fascinating evidence of our island story.
It feels like architecture. It's beautiful, actually.
It's like sculptural.
It is sculpture,
Yeah.
it really is.
And what archaeologists are discovering has got them excited.
It's basically what you can see when the tide goes out. The historical remains that are revealed on the shoreline at low tide. And the reason they're excited is that more and more material is coming to light.
Every day on a pebbly or sandy beach or a rocky foreshore, fascinating evidence of our island history appears and disappears as the tide rolls in and rolls back out again.
U-boats, ancient fish traps, abandoned barges, lost fortresses.
We're in the world's first lifeboat station.
They all need to be recorded because the coastline is now under threat from rising sea levels, coastal erosion and sudden storm surges.
So before the violence of the changing seas rips away our heritage, we're teaming up with 3 of Britain's leading coastal archaeologists to investigate these remnants of our past and try to uncover the amazing stories behind them.
The conning tower would be next.
This week, we are in Merseyside, just up the coast from Liverpool. We'll be investigating a beach full of building rubble.
It's the remains of a destroyed city.
We're on the hunt for 7,000-year-old footprints.
Oh, look at this one!
We'll be sniffing the special aroma of some very old tobacco.
That's really weird.
And we'll track down Liverpool's own version of the Whisky Galore story, when the locals plundered a wrecked boat of its booze.
The lure of the whiskey was too much for them.
Twice a day, every day, the tide turns. Constantly ebbing and flowing, it allows us to see bits of our past and then covers them up again. This is the beach at Formby Point in Merseyside. While it looks beautiful and calm, these waters are treacherous. Coastal erosion here makes the sandbanks very mobile, and the tidal range, the difference between low and high tide, can be over 30 feet. A ship can easily be caught out by shifting channels and the 20,000 acres of sandbanks that dry out at low tide.
This is gorgeous.
We are heading out with our archaeology team to look at one ship that did run aground. It's hard to believe that we are just 12 miles away from Liverpool.
Liverpool, once, of course, the second greatest port in England, with its great maritime empire, supported by all these ships coming and going from all over the world.
Yeah, coming through the Mersey. But, I mean, now it seems to be walking on this huge sandbank.
Yeah.
It stretches for miles. It doesn't seem like the safest place to bring a boat through.
Well, I was just going to say, not all of the ships made it. If you look out there, you'll see the remains of the Pegu. It's a strange lump of metal stuck on a sandbank.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a boat at all, actually, from here. I mean,
It is actually stranded on a sandbank. The poor old vessel, it's a 100-year-old vessel, actually, launched in about 1920, but it sank in November 1939 while trying to get into Liverpool. It beached on that sandbank. Why, you might ask, should a vessel of that size, 100 metres long, a big vessel, could take 150 passengers, why would that beach on a sandbank when you've got the deep water channel to Liverpool right there? While we're on the subject of treacherous waters, have you just noticed how the tide's coming in a bit here? We may be stranded right now. So I don't think we should go any further in that direction.
I mean, it does feel like it's a long, long way away, and...
Well, let's get a boat.
Let's get a boat, good
stuff.
stuff. That seems like an incredibly wise idea.
I'm full of wise ideas.
So we head off to find a boat. What did happen to the Pegu? Just why did it run aground? And no one actually knows why it was heading to Liverpool. So questions to pursue. And the archaeologists are keen to record this wreck as it is slowly disappearing. So if we can reach it, can we learn anything from it?
The coastline along here is one of the most beautiful in Britain, with wide, expansive beaches. But these large vistas mean that the landscape is totally open to the elements, with the coast being battered by both the wind and the sea. Over many thousands of years, this area has seen enormous change. We know that this used to be dry land at one point. Can we see any evidence of this, though? What the prehistoric environment might have looked like? Alison Burns from Manchester University has been studying this landscape, and archaeologist Charlotte Mecklenburg and I join her.
Wow. Okay, I was not expecting this. So here at the beach, the sea just there, and there's a tree. The only tree, it seems, for miles around.
Yes, that's right. You're looking at the remains of an ancient forest.
Wow. So this is not some tree that was felled in a gale 20 years ago and just dropped down in the mud?
No, the trees lying here are up to 5,500 years old, so very ancient.
Wow, look at that.
So,
And it has bark on it, everything. I mean,
yes.
preservation is fantastic, isn't it?
yeah, look, it's really, really papery, actually. It's pretty soft.
Although actually the bark is still quite firm, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is quite well preserved,
It
but
is,
every
really.
tide takes another little bit of wood away.
Yeah.
There's lots of loose wood lying around the tree as well, if you look carefully.
How does it come to be that a tree like this can be preserved in such great condition for such a long period of time?
Well, for many millennia, it was hidden underneath the sand and other mud, and it's only in the last 150 years or so that that top cover has actually been eroded away.
For a really long time they were protected by sands and the mud around here and the peaty layer that we're standing on, or the kind of humic forest floor layer.
Yes, yes.
But obviously now that that's eroding, we're going to be losing this.
Yes, this whole area will probably be eroded away in maybe 50 to 100 years. It's a slow process of erosion, but nevertheless it's a constant one. There are all sorts of ferns growing here, lots of grasses, various sedges because it was part of a wetland area, and slightly further inland lots of hazel, so it was a very dense undergrowth. There were many different types of animals here: red deer, roe deer, aurochs. Here I think there were beaver, there were wolves.
So this would have been an area really rich in wildlife and game then?
Oh, definitely, this was a very attractive area.
So you say attractive, and that makes me think that you think there were humans here.
Yes, there were definitely humans here.
Finding evidence of humans from thousands of years ago is an intriguing prospect. So we head off with Alison to do just that.
As the sea rolls in and out, we see evidence today of wrecks that went down over the centuries. A ship called the Mexico Disaster in 1886 with the loss of 27 lives. The Ionic Star in the 1930s. And of course, the wreck we're investigating, the Pegu, also occurred in the 1930s. We are on our way out to examine it by boat. We couldn't get to it by land. Our team of archaeologists are keen to record it before the ravages of the sea eat away any more of it. But can we learn anything about what happened by getting up close and personal? Local coastal ranger John Dempsey knows the story.
The Pegu itself was sailing towards Rangoon. It was on its way down from Glasgow, stopping off in Liverpool. It belonged to the British and Burmese Steam Navigation Company. It started up in the days when the Suez Canal opened, so there was a clear trade route right through into Asia that way. She was carrying about 103 people, we think, and various cargo and goods when she ran aground on the channels and sidebars at the edge of the navigation channel.
And of course, we would have had large colonies down in the Indian subcontinent, and so the Pegu's journey would have been one of, I guess, thousands.
It would, yes. And the name of the ship, of course, it's reflected in that. The Pegu is named, we understand, after a river in Burma.
What does it mean for you personally to see this thing?
It's wonderful. Ever since a small boy, I've looked out at the Pegu from the beach at Formby, and it's unattainable, of course, because like a lot of our wrecks, it's just too dangerous to attempt to reach on foot.
As we get closer to the Pegu, it starts to become clearer why it ran aground. Join us in part 2, where we delve deeper into the story of the Pegu. What did happen to its cargo? And why was it heading to Liverpool in the first place? We discover the efforts put in to make this area safe.
6 to 8 horses?
And we visit a beach completely covered in building rubble and attempt to work out where some of it came from.
This is Liverpool. The port of Liverpool has always been vital to Britain's trade, and today everything from timber and paper to grain, animal feed and supermarket foods pass through here. But the waters where the Mersey meets the open sea are treacherous, with shifting sandbanks and over 30 feet difference between low and high tides.
Earlier, we tried to reach the Pegu on foot, a ship that ran aground on one of those sandbanks at the start of World War II. But the incoming tide forced us back. So now we are on a boat heading out to look at the wreck with our team of leading coastal archaeologists. We are hoping to work out what happened to the ship and why she ran aground just here. And we are going to record what is left of her as she slowly disappears.
Look at that, that's incredible.
That is bizarre. It's really Mad Max-like.
Dark and menacing, isn't it? Wonderful thing.
Yes, it does look dark and menacing.
It's eerie, isn't it? You look at this sort of eerie monument.
You can see the rivets.
You can see the rivets on it. You can see some of the muscles and stuff stuck to the wreck too. And look at those boilers.
That
Absolutely
is amazing,
stunning.
isn't it?
God, that
You say the
propeller
rivets.
shaft is massive.
Big old ship, big old cargo ship going all the way to Asia and back, a regular run. A serious bit of machinery.
That's awesome.
But what exactly happened here? This was a very large ship with over 100 people on board. She was sailing into Liverpool late at night in November 1939. With World War II just started, there was a blackout, and the navigation buoys in this shipping channel were switched off. Unable to navigate the lethal sandbanks in the dark, she hit one of them, and it is evident, when we were up close, that the ship simply snapped in two. You can clearly see her straddling the sandbank, with front and rear pointing downwards.
You should have seen her up until the 80s. It was wonderful. She had the most beautiful mast still intact and sticking right up outside of the bay, so you could see her from all along the coast. Until sadly, 1987, one of the tugs slipped their moorings and collided with the wreck and down came the mast. But it was such a distinctive landmark. A lot of people who live on the coast will remember it. It's really striking.
With the mast now gone, much of the rest of this grand old ship is also slowly disappearing. Soon, as the elements batter it, there will not be much of the Pegu left. The team of archaeologists we have on board are busy trying to make a record of what remains. They are using a high-definition camera on a gimbal, which allows them to get incredible detail.
If you can zoom in for the prop shaft so we can see a bit more detail.
Yep, OK.
As part of the Citizen project, the Coastal and Intertidal Zone Archaeological Network, they are getting as much information as they can about the current state of the wreck. Work like this is urgent, as the sea eats away at what is left.
There's two reasons why we record it. One is we're just monitoring its condition now, so that then we can test it in 5 years, 10 years. It's going to fall off that bank at one stage, and when it does that, then we'll lose the industrial archaeology of its boiler construction and how those good people of Scotland riveted that boiler together by hand in 1920. It's a monument to their craftsmanship. It's a monument to the ports of Britain, as it were, and their empire, and their need to connect one to the other.
Is it because the Pegu itself, was a particular kind of vessel?
Oh yes, it was the sort of vessel that was half full of passengers and half full of cargo. You don't get that kind of interface today. If you jump on a train, you're not going to have containers sharing your first-class compartment with you. That's how people travelled in the 20s and 30s.
So what can we recover of its story before it vanishes? There are so many unanswered questions about this wreck. What was the cargo and what happened to it? And given that it was bound for Burma, why was the Pegu coming into Liverpool at all that night?
The winds that whip up the sea along this section of the coast also cause havoc on land. It's a fragile environment. The dunes are constantly under attack as coastal erosion wears them down. There have been many attempts to shore them up, and one can now be clearly seen further along the beach. This is a massive dump of building rubble which was placed here to try to save the dunes. But now, as the dunes retreat further inland, it is spilling out and covering the beach. And it runs for over 2 miles. What exactly is all this material? And where is it from? Andrew Crompton from the School of Architecture at Liverpool University has been looking into it.
It is a bit like the end of the world.
It is. It does. It feels like the end of the world, but what are we actually looking at here?
It's the remains of a destroyed city.
Really?
Liverpool, from the war.
Liverpool was devastated in the Blitz. It was a major German target. The port of Liverpool was the way into Britain for the Americans and for supplies from across the Atlantic. So Liverpool was hit hard. After the war, the buildings destroyed or damaged by German bombs were knocked down and dumped here. At the time, it was thought that this material would help protect the coastline from further erosion.
And it was buried by the sand. You can see under the dunes, it's now a golf course and it's a nature park. But underneath there, you have old Liverpool in bits.
Goodness me, there must be tons and tons and tons of this
Yes,
stuff.
because they cleared huge areas of the city. When you look at photographs after the war, you can see the street pattern, but with cleared patches in between. And over the years, what was put there is now bleeding out onto the beach, brick by brick. And you can spot little bits of buildings. You can say, you know, that's a coping stone, that's a bit of a wall.
This place is really quite weird. A lot of it is domestic. It's odd to be walking across it, knowing that this is what is left of people's homes.
This is a floor tile,
Yes.
but this tells us about changing fashions in the interwar period.
Yes.
Because this floor has been overlaid
Right.
with what I think are linoleum tiles.
Yes, that's right.
So those changing fashions of the interwar period there. Is that the corner of a lovely sort of fancy late Victorian sink, do you think?
It's a basin, yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And this, I think, is the grill. There's a little bit of chrome on it. Grill to a fire, perhaps? Gas fire grill?
I think you're right.
To me, Andrew, you know, this is more than just a dump here. This is almost like a document from which we can read off the lives of these people, day-to-day lives, can't we? At first glance, you just see brick and concrete, but actually in between those bits of brick and concrete, you can see people, can't you?
Yes. There's a story.
There are many stories here. Every building has its own tale to tell. Much of this rubble is from housing. But can we find anything recognisable? Can we match any of this rubble to a specific building in the city? It's worth a look.
There is no questioning the human impact here on this piece of beach. But what are those humans mentioned earlier when we were looking into the story of the prehistoric forest? A few miles further north, Alison has taken us to another beach, one that gives us a chance to look for evidence of human occupation dating back thousands of years.
Is this a good place to be looking? I mean,
Yes, this area is quite good because it's at the bottom of one of the peaks of sand. And as the sand goes into the trough where the water's lying, you tend to get the mud becoming visible at that junction between the dry sand and the wet sand.
So that something ahead looks quite different. Is that the stuff we're looking for?
Yes, that's one of the beds of sediment that has collected here, so we should definitely find some footprints in there if we're lucky.
It's exciting.
Yes.
So to me, it looks kind of like someone's kicked up some mud. It doesn't look particularly...
It does, because as the sea drifts in, it breaks the mud up. But it's also in lots of different layers.
Oh, yeah, you can see that.
But in fact, where you're standing, here is a human footprint. You can see how the person was walking. They were putting pressure on the outside of their foot. Here you can see the mud that has been pushed up while the heel impacted into the mud. And you can see that the person was pushing more weight down on the outside of their foot than the inside. And again, you can see here the big toe, which has impacted quite deeply into the mud, and the mud that has squeezed up between the big toe and the next toe as well.
This mud is very dry now, but the tide comes over it all the time.
Yes,
And
yes.
presumably it gets quite sticky.
Yes,
So
it
how
gets-
do you know this isn't somebody who just walked in it yesterday?
Well, for two reasons for that, really. The first is if I push really hard with my own boot next to the footprint and remove it, you'll see that I haven't left any impression whatsoever. But the other thing is that these footprints are actually disappearing under the higher layers of mud just above them and coming out the other side.
This footprint has just been revealed by the tide on the day we found it. Prints like these come up all the time, and once revealed, they can only last one day. Left behind thousands of years ago, they were buried in the mud and covered over. What happens is simple. Someone walks across the land when the mud is very wet and soft, leaving a deep print. The high temperatures back then bake that print dry. And when the tide comes in, sand and grit fill it up, and layers of mud build on top. Now, coastal erosion is eating those top layers away, revealing the footprints to us. But once they're revealed, they're vulnerable and then disappear. In a single day, they are gone.
Left foot, right foot would be somewhere here in this puddle.
Yes.
Left foot, right foot. Oh, look at this one!
There's toes.
It's very clear, isn't it? It's a big foot, almost certainly a male foot, and it's a very long foot. The mud isn't eroded enough to have affected the size of the footprint very much. So this person was probably round about 6 foot tall.
I mean, I get a sense of that because I was walking, like literally trying to mirror their footprints, clearly taller than me because the stride length was such that it had to be from a long-legged person.
Yes, that's right. And this is quite a common size of footprint that you find here.
Really?
Yes.
So
yes.
this, I mean, that's probably what, like a size 9 or something?
Yes.
So we're talking tall people. I mean, it's one of those cliches that you think people were smaller in the olden days.
Yes, yeah. Not these people, because they had a very good diet. They had a very high protein diet because of all the animals that they could capture here and all the food that there was readily available for them.
Happy, healthy people.
I think so, yeah.
Mud and sand can help us see what the environment here was like in the past. So Alison's colleagues set about trying to find out more. Drilling deep into the beach, they are extracting a core of the layers of sediment for analysis. This core allows us to look back in time across thousands of years and can tell us a lot about what the area was like back then. So hopefully later we will get a clearer picture of the world inhabited by these people who left their marks in the sand between 5,000 and 7,000 years ago.
Further back down the coastline, Andrew and I are making our way slowly along the dump of building rubble deposited on this beach after the war. We know it all came from Liverpool, but we would like to find something a bit more specific. Many important buildings were destroyed in the Blitz. Is there anything here that might be part of one of those?
This is the threshold stone, isn't it?
I guess.
Here.
And a lamppost.
Bit of water pipe.
Then we spot something that makes us stop in our tracks.
What about this over here? Look at this.
OK.
That's different, isn't it?
That stands out. That is a classical moulding.
Right.
That is a real building. That's a bit of architecture. Oh my gosh. That is a very expensive piece of stone.
Wow.
From a proper public building.
Good stuff.
And that is a classical moulding. It could be, I'd say, Doric or Ionic. It's a bit worn.
Yep.
But that is a candidate for one of the large classical buildings on the waterfront that went down in the war.
I mean, this is a... There's no doubt about it. This is a huge building, isn't it, this?
Well, if that's just kind of one brick,
Yeah.
then that's very big Lego, you know?
Yeah.
OK, I'm going to give it a... I'm going to size it up.
Go on, you size it up.
So it's about 5 feet 8 inches
5 feet 8
for
inches, yeah?
for the thing that stood on that. There was a wall here,
Yeah.
and then this would have been a pilaster, like a square-faced column
Yeah.
that rose off here.
So we're onto something here, aren't we?
Well, a bit of something,
Great.
but a very big bit.
There aren't many buildings made of stone as intricate as this. It's a very specific and unique looking piece. I would just love to be able to find out which one it is. Join us later, where we hope to do just that.
And we asked whether the people who worked in the building that was here managed to keep people alive. We're in Merseyside, just 12 miles north of Liverpool, on a beach at Formby Point. These waters look calm enough, but that's on a day like today. The truth is that this is a coastline of shifting sands, treacherous water, and savage coastal erosion. It's a cocktail that has produced fascinating archaeology, revealing prehistoric footprints and unusual ways to shore up the dunes.
And these dangerous channels also made the Pegu run aground on its way into Liverpool. We don't know why it was going there, as it was en route from Glasgow to Burma. On board were 103 people and cargo. Everyone escaped, but the cargo broke free and drifted with the tides. Some of it washed ashore.
So, Oliver, you obviously spent lots of time on the foreshore, but do you ever get the chance to come and look at the written records?
I do, but most of the time is spent trawling the internet, sort of staring at a screen, so it's great to come and have a look at the real thing.
It was a big story then, so a good way to find out more about it is always the local newspaper.
So much for not staring at screens, Ollie.
Quite.
You seem to have got the more updated microfiche machine there.
Well, I think the machines are kind of relevant to our ages, actually, Alex.
Yeah, here we are. Look, February the 1st, here we are. Right, what have I got here? Oh, wait a minute, look at that. Here we are.
Ah, that's the Pegu, yeah.
The wreck of the Pegu as she is today. Look, so we can see here, it's still got its mizzen mast. OK, what does it say? Look, we've got a mention here of Scotch.
Ah.
So here, we're getting onto the cargo. On board the Pegu were bags of mail for Bombay and Rangoon. And in her hold, she carried sewing machines, cars, iron and steel, empty bottles, cement, crates of beer, and cartons of whiskey.
Whiskey. Well,
whiskey.
It's funny you say that, because I have found here, this is from December 1939,
Yep.
a story about some washed-up whiskey on shore, and this is the account of a father and son, local father and son, Henry and Ralph Dewsbury,
Right.
who were accused of stealing 2 bottles of whiskey to the value of £1, 9 shillings and 6 pence. But this has a fantastic bit of smoking gun evidence in it.
Right, OK.
On Saturday, December the 2nd, Detective Constables Grundy and Taylor went to 23 Denmark Street. They heard someone groaning inside and found one of the accused on the couch and the other on the floor of the living room, semi-conscious. Here we go. 2 empty whiskey bottles bearing traces of sand were on the floor beside them. Fantastic.
Red-handed?
Red-handed. It goes on to say as well, it was impossible to question the prisoners in that condition, so they were taken to the police station in Waterloo.
And this is the original Whisky Galore story, isn't it? This is.
It's there, definitely.
Your poor, unfortunate father and son team there didn't really realise the lure of the whiskey was too much for them.
I think so. Perhaps too much for their heads in the end as well.
Navigating a safe passage through the shifting sandbanks has always been tricky. Working out the tides, where the sandbanks were, made it safer. This man, William Hutchinson, did just that. He was a real character. Once a privateer, a pirate, he then became dockmaster in Liverpool. He invented the parabolic mirror for lighthouses. He wrote an extensive book on seamanship, and he was very much aware of where the danger points were along the Formby coast, the pinch points where ships had problems. So, he decided to build a lifeboat station, the world's first, in fact, and he built it here on Formby Point. Today we look at this spot and think of it as being entirely in the wrong place. It's very far away from the sea. But back in the 1770s, when this place was built, it was exactly right.
The thing we have to remember is that today we're used to lifeboat stations launching straight into the sea, the lifeboats.
Yes, very much so, yeah.
With those highly inclined ramps with the top above the highest anticipated tide. Here we're talking about a shed with a lifeboat which has to be dragged from a relatively safe high position into
the
wherever the
Into-
sea
yeah.
happens to be
And-
with these shifting sandbanks at the time. And
yeah.
the ships are not going to ground where you want them to ground or wreck where you want them to wreck. They're going to be there, there, there.
There's not much left of the lifeboat station now. The outer walls are flanked by these red bricks. And it's under attack from two directions. The sea is eroding the exposed walls, while the dunes are covering up the rest of it.
You can see we have a couple of walls here with this red sandstone
Yep.
clamped together very purposefully
Yeah, I can see some
with these iron
clamping metals
clamps.
there. Yep.
And alas, the walls disappeared at this point. So it clearly ran through along further, right up to the sand dunes.
It was massive.
And according to John, they're actually underneath the sand dunes.
Wow,
Parts of the structure under the dune, yeah.
that's a huge structure.
Yes, it is.
A very substantial structure then. So what did it actually look like in its day?
If you look at this, you have a very clear offset, and you can see that timber floor or a tile floor could be butted up against that buttress. So that's the actual floor level of the structure when it was functioning.
So we've got the foundations, the walls, if you like, the base of the walls anyway. You've got a sense of a floor. What on earth would the building have looked like?
There's some lovely archive photographs that show a very large, almost double door front, which presumably was where the boat was taken out, led by a team of between 6 and 8 horses.
6 to 8 horses?
Well, between 6 and 8 horses would have dragged the thing out.
Would they have lived here?
Some might, occasionally they would have been here, others would have been brought down depending on the nature of the alarm and the weather. So the team would vary between 6 and 8 horses. It could take quite a long time in bad conditions for a team to hook up and get the boat out to the water.
Yeah.
Would you like to know how big those boats were that did the rescue?
Do you know what, Gustav, that was my next question. I was thinking, how big, if you've got that many horses, how big a boat was it?
We're going to show you how big the boats were, because they're very small. They're only about... keep going and I'll tell you when to stop. You can stop now.
Wow.
That, you are standing at one end of the boat.
30 feet, 9 metres.
That's the length of the boat.
Here it is now. What on earth happened to it?
The lifeboat station itself was open throughout Victorian times, right through into the 20th century. But then channels changed, the sands changed, it began to be engulfed by the sand itself.
This lifeboat station lasted almost 150 years. It was the world's first, a totally new idea, set up in a spot where shipping was in real danger. So can we find out anything more about it? Did it save many lives? Just how useful was this lifeboat station?
The coastline here is largely sand and dunes. Dunes form when the sand blows inland and settles. They grow. But there is a section of the beach further north which looks different. This looks more like a cliff face than undulating dunes. Anyone walking along here won't necessarily notice anything odd.
However, there is a very distinctive smell.
How on earth did there come to be tobacco in the dunes of Formby?
Yeah, it's fascinating, really, isn't it? Well, I think there was a different attitude to dunes in the 1950s. From 1956, British Nicotine, a company that was based in Bootle, near the Bootle Docks in Liverpool, got permission from the Blundell estate, and they continued to tip it for a period of about 20 years.
Wow.
On a landscape that had been agricultural beforehand. So there's about 22,000 tonnes a year.
22,000 tonnes a year?
Yeah, it was tipped wet, so it was very sloppy, and then it dried out. So by the time it had dried out, it's probably about 7,500 tonnes a year.
Still quite a lot of tobacco.
It is, and they sold about 1,000 tonnes to local farmers.
Oh, right, really?
But this is the...
Is this it?
This is it, yeah. I can show you the...
Oh, gosh.
Oh, it's quite tough.
Oh,
If you take a little smell of that, you might even get the sense of tar.
That's really weird. Joe, that is... Do you know what that smells like to me?
Well, it is tobacco, but that's really... when I was learning to read, when I was little, in my school, they used to have tins of words.
Oh,
and
right.
the tins, they use little bits of word paper, and they used to put them into tins, tobacco tins.
Yes.
So this smells
So it's
just
got
like
the residual
the opening of that box.
odour of it, yeah.
It's the smell of learning to read. It's all that
Brilliant,
is.
yeah.
But there's the smell of tobacco. That's really, really weird. It's almost sort of aniseedy, actually. Have a sniff, what do you reckon? Yeah.
I get that really stringent, tarry smell that's, you know, a little bit like
it's,
coal tar soap.
Yes,
Yeah?
yeah.
20,000 tonnes a year is a lot of waste. It covers a huge area, 20 acres or so. Part of it was dumped on the dunes to try and stabilise them, but that hasn't worked. The rate of erosion here is one of the highest in the country, and the forces of nature are eating away at what is left. It is estimated that 400 metres of coastline will disappear this century alone.
The dangers of this coast have been well known for centuries. The huge tidal range, the uncertainty of the channels and the mobile sandbanks, stirred up by ferocious winds, made this stretch of coast lethal to shipping. The world's first lifeboat station was built here at Formby Point in the 1770s, and it remained here until 1918. This is footage of the last time it was launched. With the changeable channels and shifting sands, the station for this lifeboat was eventually moved further along the coast, following the danger, as it were. But was it useful here? Can the records tell us anything about the job it did?
So here we are. This is a book that
Oliver has been looking at them in the Maritime Museum in Liverpool.
We have the call-out sheets, really, from the lifeboat station
wow.
that log each call that was made.
OK.
And we've got them details here by date. We've got the vessel name. We've got the rig, type of ship it was.
Right.
And as you can see here, I mean, just in one night alone, we got December the 3rd.
Yeah.
The crew were called out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in one night.
Goodness me.
That's an incredibly stormy night in 1863.
Yeah, and I guess also an indication of just how treacherous that Formby Channel was.
Certainly, very much so. I mean, looking through the 1860s, there were 32 call-outs made in that period. So if we think about the numbers involved in those crews on 32 ships, we're most likely looking at hundreds of lives that were saved by the lifeboat.
So it's an absolute necessity, really. If the Formby Channel was going to operate and effectively serve Liverpool, it needed this lifeboat station.
It needed to protect its sailors and also to sort of protect its cargo and to help in the salvage operation.
Interesting to think about, such a sort of humble building would have played such an important role and maybe been responsible for rescuing perhaps many hundreds of people, I guess.
Indeed, perhaps even many thousands over the course of its life.
Join us in part 4, where we find out why the Pegu was going into Liverpool that dark night in November 1939, and we discover more about the landscape in these parts 7,000 years ago.
We know quite a lot about the dangers of the sea in these parts, but there was another danger only 75 years ago, and that came from the air. This dump of building rubble on the beach at Hightown is testament to that. All of this material came from Liverpool, in fact, mostly from Bootle. And most of the damage was done in 1 week, in May 1941. There were almost 200 raids in that 1 week by German bombers. 20,000 people were made homeless. Over 12,000 houses had to be demolished. One of the most important buildings in Liverpool was this one, the old Customs House. It was down at the docks and was the city's communications hub, a prime target for German bombers. Earlier, on the beach, we found this large stone. Andrew Crompton, from the University of Liverpool, believes that it comes from the Customs House. So he's brought me along to the site to have a look.
This is where the old Customs House used to stand.
Right.
And this photograph is taken, I think, from where we're standing now.
Right, OK, so we've got here, this is the quayside known as the Strand.
Yes.
We're standing this side. We've got the corner here of the Strand and this street over there. So the corner of the building would have been here, but it would have stretched basically all the way along this dockside beyond the police quarters.
Yes.
You know, that is a monumental piece of architecture, isn't it?
Yes, but we're looking here at a building that's been damaged. It's had the dome taken off, the floor and the roof are gone.
Right,
It's been bombed.
You can see here that the light shining through these windows. It's very definitely lost its roof, hasn't it?
Yes, it's in quite bad condition.
Now, we were down on the beach in Formby and we recovered this really rather lovely piece of monumental stone.
Yes.
Do you think you can identify this piece of stone in that photograph there?
Approximately, yes. I think it's the base of one of the pilasters. We could be that stone or that stone or that stone. Can't say which one, but
Right.
one of those. They're all the same.
Right, OK. So let's have a look here. It's a wonderful piece of architecture. Yeah, I can see that now in here.
Yeah.
One of these spaces here.
It's been cleaned by the sea, so it's changed colour.
Yeah.
But everything else is right.
Wow, so we've got a small fragment here of what must have been one of Liverpool's most important buildings.
In its day, it was the finest building in Liverpool.
Really?
So the piece of stone we found on the beach is one of these pieces of stone in this historic building in Liverpool. It could be any of them. It is strange to think that this building is now rubble on Hightown Beach.
Earlier we saw that there is evidence of life on the shore from around 7,000 years ago. We saw the remains of a forest, and Alison Burns from the University of Manchester showed us footprints dating back to that time. Her colleagues took a core sample from the exposed beach at low tide, and I'm visiting Alison to see what they were able to find out. They have now run a series of diagnostic tests on the core. Can their work tell us anything about the people who lived here thousands of years ago, or their environment?
So here we have the photograph of the core. Next to it is the X-ray, and to the side are all the chemical signatures. And you can see that the higher you get in the core, the more changes there are. That area of the core is where the humans were walking.
This part of the core relates to 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, when those footprints were set into the mud. And the bursts of activity shown by these lines show that people were living at a very volatile time.
So what do you think that tells us about the world in which these humans were inhabiting?
It would appear that it could have been quite stormy. Some of those signatures may relate to storm surges, perhaps. Sometimes when they came down onto the beach, the reed beds that they had experienced one day would be flooded the next. So they would have had to be quite aware of their environment. And I have found in evidence from the footprints that a lot of children and youths were present on the salt marshes. So it may have been that they were being taught how to deal with such a volatile environment.
If you're living in a landscape that has been volatile and has been volatile for generations, then having everybody on hand, learning as they go along, seems like a rather sensible strategy for dealing with it.
Yes, I think that is what we see, because quite frequently you see youth footprints running in tandem with male footprints. So they were clearly engaged in activities together.
So the coastline around Formby has always been a tricky place to live. Sea levels rise and fall. Even 7,000 years ago, people who lived close to the sea had to find means of coping with it and its ways.
Back in more modern times, our investigation into the shipwrecked Pegu has revealed that its cargo, including a lot of whiskey, was largely salvaged by the good people of Formby. But one question remains. Why was the Pegu heading into Liverpool, having only just left Glasgow?
It never ceases to amaze me how well documented British merchant naval history is. Believe it or not, all of these documents I have in front of me relate to the stranding of the Pegu. I've got here the minute books from the meetings of the board of the British and Burmese Steam Navigation. One of the things that comes across is that the mainstay of this business was very much the rice trade, bringing rice back from the colonies to Britain. And of course it makes perfect sense. Britain in the 1870s and 1880s had a growing population that needed feeding. But in the vessels going back the other way, we know that from Glasgow, steel, machinery and whiskey was being taken. But what was coming from Liverpool? Well, it was cotton and other goods. And of course, that makes perfect sense because we think about Liverpool at the turn of the century was exporting just under half of all of Britain's cotton cloth to the colonies.
So the Pegu was picking up cotton in Liverpool. That makes sense and answers a question that has been nagging away at people for years. The Pegu was a fine ship and takes us back to a time when cargo and passengers travelled on the same vessel, a practice harking back to a bygone age. Sadly, as she slowly disappears, another era will be gone.
This area of coast has thrown up recurring themes. The continual battle with the currents, changing sands causing havoc at sea. The winds and coastal erosion eating away at the land. We attempted to sort that by dumping tobacco waste and building materials onto the beach. But this volatile coast is forever changing, and even those efforts are finding it tough. What we think of as something beautiful and benign has the power to turn nasty quickly. As those who worked in the world's first lifeboat station and those who were shipwrecked in those ever-changing and shifting sands can testify.
Join us next week when we will be exploring the story behind a Tudor fort.
What we have here are the remains of the East Mersey blockhouse.
We get to grips with a relic from World War I.
There it is. Wow.
And we look at an industry going back 2,000 years.
Well, I can see it's a structure, but what is it?
And every weekday at 3 we'll find out if it's a life by the sea or it's all about the rolling fields and animals in coast versus country. And if you think we've got it bad, well, think again. Have you ever seen a total blackout due to a sandstorm or a green sky that spells trouble? The world's weirdest weather on More 4 next. Next though on 4, lots of fast cars, explosions and a huge rock. It's Fast and Furious 6.